You have various controversies attributed to your name, and one of them was an article that you did that I think made worldwide headlines. It was in 2005, I believe. You were one of the authors with Dr. Shivers and Riggers. I don't want to mispronounce the name. Um, that basically the headlines across the media screamed, "Bisexuality does not exist." Yeah, that was 2005, I believe, right? Um,
Yes.
and I know you came up with another paper in 2011 and 12. I mean, you did the research and then it was published in separate papers. Do you want to
And
talk a little bit about, let's say, what the interest in that particular study was and I guess, the flack following it?
yeah, gladly. The main author, the first author on that paper was my then graduate student, Gerolf Rieger. Meredith Chivers was also on it, and I was too. And that was motivated um, by skepticism about the meaning of male bisexuality. Obviously, we've known that some men self identify as bisexual, uh, but, identity is not always accurate in every way. There's a saying that among gay men, my gay friends would sometimes say, yeah, you're either gay, straight, or lying,
Right.
meaning that, they think that bisexual guys are not being honest, which I can understand why that would rub people the wrong way. And I'm not, I don't think even when they were being inaccurate that they were necessarily lying. But I think that where they were coming from is that a lot of gay men went through a stage when they identified as bisexual because it was easier for them, to think of themselves as bisexual than totally gay. The people around them preferred the idea that they had some chance, I guess, of being with women and so on. And we wanted to explore this question scientifically. Basically, here's the idea. Um, we recruit gay and straight men as well as bisexual men. We show them uh, erotic stimuli featuring either men or women, not both. And we look to see whether bisexual men have a relatively bisexual arousal pattern. One way to think about that is that, you know, a straight arousal pattern would be much more arousal to women than to men. A gay arousal pattern is much more arousal to men than to women. A bisexual arousal pattern is not so big a difference.
Right.
So we did the study, and we didn't find any evidence that the bisexual men had smaller differences in their arousal to men and women than the gay and straight men. And for the most part, they did actually have a more homosexual arousal pattern. They were more aroused by the male than the female stimuli. We never said that we had shown that male bisexuality didn't exist. What we said is we didn't find evidence that men who have bisexual arousal patterns existed, but we left open the possibility that they may, and we just didn't find them. The New York Times did an article about it, and in their headline, they did do the straight, gay, or lying line. And, they weren't saying that that was true. That was just, it was relevant to that saying. It was a good article, but immediately, that article was attacked, and we were attacked. We were pressured by other sex researchers who were bisexually identified to renounce the New York Times article, which we did not do. The activists and the organizations about gay and lesbian and bisexual rights wrote scathing reviews of the study. To this day, it was a good study, and it was a needed study. It was the best study to date. And subsequently, one benefit of the controversy is that we were approached by a man named John Silla, Sylla, who is the head of the American Institute of Bisexuality, which is, partly an activist organization. But to his credit, John Silla, who did not agree with us, thought that this kind of research was valuable, and he wanted to explore funding us to do another version of the study, though with different recruitment procedures. And I just want to say, if more people were like John Silla, the world would be better. Because again, he doesn't agree with us, and yet we could talk civilly. Right. We could disagree civilly, and we could even collaborate.
One thing that people have to recognize, I have many patients who are uncertain about their sexuality or their sexual orientation or identification. And so in Toronto, where we are, and I'm not going to name names, but there are organizations that are, designed to help people explore those aspects of themselves. And I always tell people, I tell my students, I tell my patients, you want to see a lot of intolerance, go to one of these organizations. I don't want to, tarnish all of them with the same brush, but this has happened. I've had numerous patients and students verify this, that they go to these organizations that are supposed to be very tolerant, supportive, help them come out and, find out who they are. And the minute they say that they think they're bisexual, the intolerance is astounding. And that's the thing, so we have to recognize that this is not just some academic pursuit. It's not just some, wasting funds. This is a very important question that we're trying to understand. What does it mean to be gay, straight, bisexual, transsexual, pansexual, whatever it happens to be? Because it leads to the question of what does it mean to be human? And we haven't figured that out yet. For all the science and writings all these years, we're still trying to understand that. And so for people to dismiss this kind of research where we're trying to say, okay, what exactly is going on? Because as I know that your research has shown and other researchers have shown that for men, if you are self-identified as bisexual, the patterns of arousal, the patterns of even dating people or being with people interpersonally is different than it is for women. It seems that there's some evolutionary mechanism maybe that can make sense that one sex would have a different pattern of arousal or sexual identity or activity than the other, and people don't like to hear that. It's so controversial, and we need this kind of research.
Yeah, we do. And I just want to clarify that for that bisexuality study, the one that I've talked about so far, that study would have been of great interest no matter how it turned out. And I didn't have some agenda where, I really wanted it to turn out the way it did versus, if I had actually shown in that study that most bisexual guys had a bisexual arousal pattern, I would have gotten just as much publicity, and it would have all been good.
But the fact is, though, you would have gotten, let's say, gay advocates or gay activists, I should say, who would have said, no, you're just furthering this anti-gay or homophobic agenda because you want people to believe that it exists, versus saying, help bisexuals become who they really are. They're just confused, or as you say, they're lying. This is something that, again, we need to be able to look at from a disinterested stance and say, what does the evidence say to us? But doing it compassionately, and so when someone like you comes out and tries to do this research, automatically so many evil motives are attributed to you, okay? And so in your professional and, let's say, personal experiences, what were people accusing you of trying to do in the first round, the 2005 research?
To the extent that they were questioning my motives, they were saying that I was anti-bisexual.
And for what purpose, though? Why would they say you're anti-bisexual?
I mean, it's a good question why they would, because there's really no plausible answer. I mean, one of the transsexual women who had harassed me because of my book.
Is that Andrea James?
Andrea James, yeah. She wrote an article or a web page. She had basically a web book devoted to what an evil person I was, but she said something about Michael Bailey's very personal issues with bisexuality, implying that perhaps I had unresolved sexual conflicts. That was one place where they were less clear about imputing motives, but they were not unclear about my sins, which was publishing this study.
Right. So. Truth be told, I talk about that study in my class as well, and there's a few things that people need to, or should, if they want to look into it. One of them is, unfortunately, this type of research, because of the, the methodology, it's complex. It can be foreboding with, having to get the materials, have them watch it, hook themselves up to the plethysmograph or the penile strain gauge. And so the sample size is relatively small, number one. And then number two, I do a lot of interviews in the media, so I know that most journalists read the headlines, and they don't actually read the actual papers, right? So I know that one particular paper, at least in Toronto, was called, it was I Weekly at the time. They actually read the study, and they saw that about 1/3 across the gay, straight, and bisexual groups were not aroused to any of the stimuli, right? So that's an issue as well, that 1/3 were not even aroused. So they had a cheeky headline like, why doesn't it scream out, 1/3 of all men are asexual, okay, based on your research. How did that part, the fact that 1/3 of men were not sexually aroused, genitally at least, how did that play into your work and critiques and everything?
Yeah, that is something that people focused on a lot. And first, that happens in all studies using this methodology. A lot of men don't have adequate response for measurement. And, it doesn't mean anything's wrong. It's, you can imagine, this is not a sexual encounter. This is sitting in a room with an experimenter next door, right, with a rubber band around your penis, and you are not supposed to move, and so on. It's actually maybe remarkable that 2/3 do get adequate response to use their data, but it didn't really vary across the three groups what percentage were non-responders. But it just happens, and if you can't use their data because they're bad data, it's like refusing to answer the questionnaire. Well, you throw those people out. You don't average their scores, So I think people who were making a big deal out of that were just looking for anything they could, and they were not looking to understand. All genital arousal studies in men have about 1/3 non-respondents. Right?
Now, in 2011 and 12, you published a couple of other papers where you took a different methodology, both in the recruitment of your subjects and also in the stimuli that you used and the way that you assessed, or you compared the different groups. So can you talk about that? Because I thought that was quite interesting as well. You found different results from your first study.
Yes. Well, this was the result funded by the American Institute of Bisexuality. And right, they were involved in planning the research. They had no involvement in running the research or writing up the research, but we were interested in their input. And, so you all think that we missed guys with bisexual arousal patterns. Well, tell us how to find them. It actually wasn't ultimately them, but my graduate student, Alan Rosenthal, who came upon the idea of using Craigslist. Do you all have Craigslist?
Yes, we do. We do.
Okay. Yeah. There are chat rooms. There are ways or forums, for married couples who want to bring in a man to have a threesome. So we advertised there for participants because we figured, a man hanging out to have sex with a married couple, they have a good chance of having true bisexual interest. We had very strict inclusion criteria, where we required that for a man to be bisexual in our study, he had to have had both sexual relationships with men and women, and to have had a romantic relationship with a man and a woman. And, it took us a long time to get the bisexuals, much longer than to get the straight guys or the gay guys. So male bisexuality seems to be rare. But anyway, we conducted this study, and when we did the same analysis that we did in the earlier study, this time we did find that our bisexual sample had a relatively bisexual arousal pattern. That is, their arousal to men versus women, that difference was smaller than it was for straight men and for gay men.
Well, you added one more stimulus, which
Oh, yeah.
man,
Okay.
man, woman.
Yeah, right. Eric Janssen, then at the Kinsey Institute, had, and Cherney, they thought that maybe it would be cool to show what they called a bisexual stimulus, which was basically men simultaneously interacting with a man and a woman. This was not two men sandwiching a woman. This was a man in the middle interacting with a man and with a woman. And we used that stimulus as well. And that arousal to that stimulus was also predictive of male bisexuality. The bisexual men were more aroused by that than either straight men or gay men were.
Right. And you had other measurements as well that you were trying to help explain why would certain men identify as bisexual rather than gay. I mean, you were looking at psychological phenomena as well. And I'm not going to go into all that. I'll put people want to look into it. They can check out the study. But it wasn't just. I just want people to know it wasn't just a genital arousal to these stimuli. You were looking at other psychological factors, and what you mentioned, I think, is very important as well. The difference in your inclusionary criteria is that you distinguish between a sexual encounter or sexual relationship and romantic relationships or actual intimate relationships, where the bisexual men had to have had, I think it was at least one, or was it two of each for men and for women?
I think one romantic, maybe two sexual.
Right.
I can't remember. Yeah.
Right. So that way, it's not just somebody who may have had an encounter or someone who's curious. They actually had a real relationship. And I always say this to my students that many men or women may experiment. They might get drunk. They might do something sexually, but to actually go as far as to have a relationship, a long-term romantic relationship, that is a different animal altogether than just a sexual encounter. So I'm glad that you distinguish between those. And the other thing that I think people need to understand, I'm going to put a graphic on the screen of the Kinsey scale from 0 to 6, which is that you didn't ask for 0, which is entirely heterosexual, and 6, which is completely homosexual, right? You had 0s and 1s for heterosexual, 5 and 6 for homosexual, and 2 to 4 was bisexual. So why wasn't it just 0s and 6s?
Well, I think that the study would have been interesting either way. But I decided that, why not go for the whole spectrum? And, it's possible that ones are different than zeros. And, we could maybe look at that too.
I see. Okay.
And
so you're open to
fives
find
different than sixes. And, yeah.
Okay. Now, the sample size, would you not think that maybe the sample size would have precluded such a distinction? Like, because you had about 30-something, in each group again.
Yeah, I don't think ultimately we even were able to look at zeros versus ones and fives versus sixes. Just getting the people for the study took a long time, and eventually we have to do other things. We can't just keep collecting, so we just stopped the study. Or new subjects anyway. The idea of only taking zeros for heterosexual men and sixes for homosexual, that would have been defensible too. We just did not do that.